I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe I just need to get it out. Maybe I need someone to believe me. But I swear to whatever God is listening, this happened. And I don't think I've ever been the same since. It was late November 2012. The night was cold, barely above freezing. I was 17, reckless, and up to no good with my friend Aaron. We had a habit sneaking out to random, abandoned places just for the thrill of it. That night, we decided to drive out to a state park in the Appalachian Mountains, a place called Brown Mountain Trail, supposedly one of the creepiest trails in the region. People had gone missing there, and some strange stories about that place in the woods. It was around 11:30 p.m. when we arrived. The place was dead silent. No other cars. No rangers. Just us and the towering trees, their skeletal branches twisting against the night sky. We parked the car near some old picnic tables, right next to the woods. I remember stepping out, my boots crunching against the frosty ground. It was so damn cold, maybe 2 or 3 degrees Celsius at best. But we weren't worried about the cold. We were too busy soaking in the eerie silence, the kind that settles deep in your bones, the kind that tells you something is off. Aaron turned to me, rubbing his hands together for warmth. Dude, this place gives me the creeps. I scoffed, trying to play it cool. That's the point. Hell, we came here for the thrill. But truth be told, I felt it too. That gnawing, gut-wrenching sense of being watched. We stayed outside for maybe 10 minutes, debating whether to walk down the trail, but something just felt wrong. Like the air was too still, like the trees were listening. So we got back in the car, deciding we'd sit for a bit, then bail. That's when it happened. Aaron turned the key in the ignition. Click. Nothing. He tried again. Click. Click. The engine didn't even try to turn over. I laughed nervously. No way. Your car's not dead, man. Aaron's face was pale. Dude, I swear it was fine earlier. Batteries new. There's no reason. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. Faint lights, flickering, moving through the trees. My stomach twisted into knots. They weren't headlights. They weren't flashlights. They were this sickly green color, like glow sticks, but dimmer, more unnatural. And they were getting closer. What the hell is that? I whispered. Aaron turned his head, his breathing going ragged. No. Nope. Not happening. Not damn happening. The lights got closer, weaving between the trees like something was carrying them. And then they stepped out. 3 figures. Small. Hooded. Children. They couldn't have been older than 11 or 12, but there was something wrong about them. Their faces hidden by their hoods, bodies unnaturally still. They weren't shivering from the cold. They weren't moving at all. They just stood there, watching. I felt a chill crawl down my spine, worse than the cold air biting at my skin. My mind screamed at me. Something isn't right. Get the hell out of here. Aaron rolled down his window just a crack. Hey, you kids okay? Silence. They didn't move, didn't speak, didn't blink. I grabbed Aaron's arm. Roll the window up. Now. He didn't argue. He reached for the controls, but the second his hand moved, one of the kids, the one in the gray hoodie, stepped forward. Not walked. Stepped, like it was being controlled. Like something unseen had just nudged it closer to us. My blood turned to ice. Aaron fumbled with the keys again. Start, you piece of bullshit. Start. The kid lifted his head. I barely saw his face, but I didn't need to see much. Just a glimpse. Dark. Black. Empty. The second I saw those eyes, every hair on my body stood on end. I don't even have the words to describe it. It wasn't just the color. It was like looking into a void, a bottomless pit, something that should not exist. My brain screamed at me to run, to fight, to do something, but I was frozen. Then, just as suddenly, they vanished. Gone. No flickering lights, no movement. Nothing. Aaron slammed his fists against the steering wheel. Start, damn it. And then the car roared to life. I don't remember much after that. I just know we got the damn out of there. I don't even think we spoke the entire way home because our mind was just frozen in shock. Just sat in silence, hearts pounding, hands trembling. We never went back to that spot again, but I still dream about it. About those black, soulless eyes staring back at me from the darkness. I swear I can still feel them watching in my nightmares. It was the dead of winter, the kind of cold that bites through your skin and settles deep in your bones. This trip was our last hurrah before life swallowed us whole. Graduation, jobs, the endless grind of adulthood. We've been talking about it for weeks, always pushing it back for one reason or another. But this time, we weren't backing out. No excuses. A 3-day camping trip in the Appalachian wilderness. Just the 4 of us, no phones, no people, no bullshit. Just raw, untamed nature. Finding a spot wasn't easy. Most trails were either monitored or required permits, and we wanted none of that. We wanted isolation, the kind of place where you could scream at the top of your lungs and no one would hear you. After hours of scouring maps and forums, we found a stretch of land near a frozen lake, far from any tourist trails. It would take a solid day of hiking to get there, but that was part of the appeal. We wanted the challenge. The drive was brutal. The roads narrowed into forgotten paths, choked with snow, and the temperature kept dropping. By the time we reached the drop-off point, it was 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind was merciless. It cut through our layers like a knife as we loaded up our gear and started the trek. "You sure about this?" Callum asked, his breath visible in the freezing air. "Yeah," Ewan shot back, adjusting his backpack. "We've been talking about this for weeks. No turning back now." We set out at 9 a.m. sharp. The snow was knee-deep, and every step felt like a battle. It took us nearly 7 grueling hours to cover the 10-mile hike to the lake. By the time we reached the clearing, the sun was slipping behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the half-frozen lake. My legs were on fire, and the cold gnawed at my bones. "This better be worth it," Lauren muttered, his face red from the wind. We fought the gusts to set up our tents, nearly losing one to a brutal blast of wind. Starting a fire was another battle. The wood was damp, and the wind kept snuffing out our matches. Finally, we got a small flame going. It wasn't much, but it was enough to warm our hands and cook some canned beans. I woke up the next morning to ice crusting my gear, the thermometer reading a bone-chilling 10 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind had died down, but the cold was relentless. We huddled around the fire, sipping instant coffee and trying to shake off the numbness. "What's the plan for today?" Callum asked, his teeth chattering. "Let's explore," Ewan suggested. We didn't come all this way to sit around. By 10 a.m., we decided to venture deeper into the forest. The snow crunched beneath our boots as we pushed through the dense trees. The cold sapped our strength with every step, but we pressed on. 4 hours, and 6 miles later, we found it. A shelter, old and forgotten, tucked away among skeletal trees. The roof sagged under the weight of snow, the walls blackened in places as if they'd been scorched. The door was missing, and the windows were shattered. Something about it felt wrong. It wasn't a ranger's cabin. It wasn't anything official. It looked abandoned, more like something wanted it left alone. "What the hell is this?" Laurent whispered. I felt a pull to go inside. Something deep in my gut urged me forward. But Callum shut that down fast. "No," he said firmly. "We're not going in there." "Why not?" Ewan argued. "It's just an old shack. You don't feel it." Callum shot back, his eyes darting around. "This place, it's not right. We need to leave. Now." Without another word, we turned back, trudging through the snow. The shelter stayed burned into my memory, a dark spot in an already eerie landscape. We returned to camp, the cold worsening as night fell. The fire barely kept us warm. Sleep was fitful, filled with dreams of that damned shelter. 2 days later, the curiosity became unbearable. We decided to go back, this time bringing a weapon, a hunting knife Lauren had packed. We left camp at noon, retracing our steps, expecting to see the same eerie structure standing in that clearing. But when we reached the spot, the shelter wasn't there. Not collapsed. Not buried under snow. Just gone. "What the hell?" Ewan muttered, his breath visible in the freezing air. We stood frozen, trying to make sense of it. The trees were the same. The jagged rock by the clearing was still there. We hadn't taken a wrong turn. It should have been there. Then Callum saw it. Just behind the trees, a little farther away, something moved. Not a shadow. Not an animal. A tall, human-like figure, but not. Darker than anything around it, like it was swallowing the dim light of the winter sun. "Run. Now." Callum's whisper was sharp, raw fear. We just ran, our legs screaming as we tore through the snow. Behind us, something crashed through the trees, fast, heavy, relentless. The panic was primal, driving us forward even as exhaustion clawed at our muscles. "Don't stop!" Laurent yelled. The camp came into view, but we didn't stop. We grabbed what we could and kept running. No way in hell we were spending another night out there. We pushed through the frozen terrain. We reached the ranger station just before midnight, half frozen, hearts pounding. Only then did we see it 3 deep, fresh scratches down Lauren's back. 2 of the marks were deep, almost too precise, like something had deliberately carved them into his skin. The rangers were deeply concerned, questioning us repeatedly about what had happened. They insisted we stay the night at the station, unwilling to let us leave in our shaken state. But no matter how many times we went over it in our heads, we couldn't understand how those marks got there. Who or what had done it? We hadn't seen anything. No shadow, no figure, nothing while we were running. And yet, the evidence was right there on Laurent's back. At sunrise, we didn't waste a second. We gathered our things and left without looking back. None of us wanted to stay in that place a moment longer. That was 7 years ago. Since then, we haven't met in person again. Life moved on: graduation, jobs, the everyday grind. Our only connection now is through the occasional phone call. But the marks on Laurent's back never faded still. The marks remain, a permanent reminder of something we can't explain, something not human. Even after all these years, none of us can forget. The missing shelter, the shadowy figure, the unexplainable wounds. Some things aren't meant to be understood. Let me tell you about my friend's story, Elias Voss. Back in September 2013, he and his buddy, Callum, decided to take on the Appalachian wilderness. Not the touristy parts, mind you. No, they went deep, the kind of deep where you're more likely to run into a bear than another human. Elias was the kind of guy who thrived on adventure. He'd always been that way. Callum, on the other hand, was more cautious, but he trusted Elias implicitly. They'd been friends since high school, and they'd been through some shit together. The plan was simple: spend a month hiking, camping, fishing in alpine lakes, and exploring the backcountry. They'd packed enough supplies to last them for a month, or so they thought. They started their trek in the northern section of the Appalachians, near the Maine, New Hampshire border. The first week was everything they'd hoped for. The air was cool, the scenery was breathtaking, and the isolation was exactly what they needed. They covered about 15 miles a day, pushing themselves through dense forests, rocky ridges, and icy streams. Elias was in his element, cracking jokes and pointing out every bird and squirrel like he was some kind of backcountry tour guide. Callum was just happy to be out there, away from the noise of the city. But then, on the 10th day, disaster struck. They were navigating a steep, rocky section of the trail when Elias slipped and twisted his knee. The pain was immediate and intense, like someone had driven a knife into his joint. He tried to tough it out, but after a few more steps, it was clear he wasn't going anywhere. Callum helped him to a small, dilapidated cabin they'd spotted earlier. It wasn't much, just 4 walls and a roof, but it was better than nothing. "You're staying here," Callum said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll hike out and get help. It's only about 20 miles to the nearest ranger station. I'll be back in a couple of days, tops." Elias didn't like the idea of being left alone, but what choice did he have? His knee was swollen to twice its normal size, and he could barely put weight on it. Callum left him with enough food and water to last a few days, along with a revolver for protection. "Just in case," he said, handing it to Elias with a grim smile. The first day alone wasn't so bad. Elias kept himself busy by reading and trying to ignore the throbbing in his knee. But by the second day, the isolation started to get to him. The cabin creaked and groaned with every gust of wind, and the silence was deafening. He kept the revolver close, just in case. On the 3rd day, he heard something outside. At first, he thought it was Callum returning, but the footsteps were too heavy, too deliberate. His heart raced as he grabbed the revolver and peered out the window. There was nothing there, just the endless expanse of trees and rocks. He told himself it was just an animal, but deep down, he wasn't convinced. Finally, on the 4th day, Callum returned with a search team. Elias was gone. They found the cabin empty, his gear scattered, and no sign of him. The revolver was missing, along with his boots. The search team scoured the area for weeks, using helicopters, scent dogs, and volunteers. They covered every inch of the wilderness, but there was no trace of Elias. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. For 10 years, his disappearance remained a mystery. Callum never gave up hope, but as the years passed, even he began to wonder if he'd ever know what happened to his friend. Then, in 2023, a hunter stumbled upon Elias's remains near Creek, about 10 miles from the cabin. His gear was there too, but his boots and revolver were still missing. The discovery raised more questions than answers. How had he ended up so far from the cabin? What had happened to his boots and gun? And who or what had been outside the cabin that night? Callum visited the site where Elias's remains were found. He told me later that it was one of the hardest things he'd ever done. The area was remote, even by Appalachian standards, and the terrain was brutal. He couldn't imagine how Elias had gotten there, especially with a busted knee. The official explanation was that he'd gotten lost and succumbed to the elements, but Callum wasn't buying it. He knew Elias too well. He wasn't the type to wander off, especially not without his boots. The truth is, no one knows what happened to Elias. Callum remembers the cabin. He could only expect what could happen. Maybe he got lost. Maybe he was attacked by an animal. Or maybe there was something else out there. What I do know is that the wilderness is unpredictable, and no matter how prepared you think you are, it can still swallow you whole. Elias's story is a reminder of that. So, if you're planning a trip into the vast wilderness, be smart. Pack more than you think you'll need. Tell someone your plans, and for God's sake, don't go alone. Because once you're out there, there's no guarantee you'll make it back.